Hey, it's Martin from Cobbled Folk Revival, and I mentioned in one of my videos a couple of days ago that I would show you the way I make strops. It really is a very simple project that you can do. So I'm going to show you my supplies that I have, and then we're just going to jump right in. So I've got a piece of leather. This leather has that kind of suede on both sides. If your leather is only that soft suede feel on one side, just know that that's the side that you want up. So if you have smooth on one side, suede on the other, you'll glue the smooth side down. Speaking of glue, I've got a good 2-part epoxy. So you can buy epoxy at the hardware store. What I use is called G-Flex. I started using it because a lot of knife makers that I know use it, and what they're using it for, like gluing the handle scales on knives, that's a pretty rugged application that has to withstand a lot of abuse. So I figured if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. This has a 24-hour dry time. What I've been led to understand is that the kind of shorthand for quality of epoxy is the dry time. So if you have something that's like a 5-minute dry time, that's not going to be quite as strong and durable as something that's longer. I have a scrap of wood here that I'm going to use as my cutting surface. I have another scrap of wood that's going to be the block that I'm going to glue the leather to here in a minute. I have another scrap of wood. I suppose I could have just used this one that we're gonna clamp these with when we're letting the glue dry. So of course, and I've got a couple of C-clamps for that purpose. I've got some polishing compound. This stuff is not sold as stropping compound. This is just from the section of the hardware store where they sell the grinding wheels and stuff like that. I have a twig. I'm going to use this to mix up my epoxy, and I have a scrap of cardboard here. That's what I'm going to mix the epoxy on. I have a good sharp pocket knife to cut the leather, and I think that's it. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do, like I said, is just cut a piece of leather that's about as big as my board. Okay. Something that's cool about this particular piece of leather that I'm using is that it came from one of Annie's grandfather's cows. So I'm making this strop for Annie to use. Okay, so I've got this. It's okay. In fact, it's better if it sits a little bit proud of the board for right now. After we glue it and let it dry, I can always trim off anything that's left over so that it's like a more perfect fit. Okay, so now I'm gonna mix up my epoxy. If you're not familiar with 2-part epoxy, I don't understand perfectly the witchcraft of how this works, but basically this stuff doesn't start to dry and harden up until you mix it together, the two parts. So they always give it to you in like 2 separate bottles, or sometimes I've seen it in one bottle but with kind of like 2 chambers, so you're squeezing them both out at the same time. You want to get an equal amount of each and then just mix it together. And you really only want to mix up about the amount you're going to use, because once you mix it, as I said, it starts to dry, and then it's game over. If you don't use it, you've lost it. Okay, so now I'm just gonna take it and spread it on my board here that I'm gonna use as the backing for the strop. And I basically just want to get even coverage, as even as possible over the whole thing, so that we don't have any parts where the leather isn't secured down. Now I did leave a strop outside once by accident, and it got rained on, and the leather peeled up off the board that it was on, and I mixed up a little bit of epoxy and just kind of slid it under there with a twig, and I still use that strop to this day, and that was years ago. So my point is, if it should so happen that you miss a spot or that it's peeling up, probably will be able to fix it. Okay, this gets set aside. That's gonna just get thrown away. I have no further use for it. What did I do with my piece of leather? There it is. So I'm gonna kind of carefully put this down. Another thing about epoxy, I don't want to go on about it too much, but it's nasty stuff. So I'm in a pretty big, well-ventilated room, and that's where you want to be also when you're using this, or outside, but don't be in like your walk-in closet spreading epoxy on things. That's one side down, and we'll get the other side clamped. All right, and so now, I believe I already mentioned this, but this has a 24-hour dry time, so this has to stay clamped for 24 hours. And you know, if you don't clamp it, it's probably okay. I've made some strops that had like a curved surface before, and obviously those are a little harder to clamp, so I just kind of like put something on it to hold it down as best I could. I don't remember what I used, but it was okay. But anyway, I hope you packed a lunch, and you don't have to go to the bathroom, because now we're going to be here for 24 hours waiting for this to dry. Just kidding. I have this other strop here that I made yesterday, and so it's done drying. This one is going to be for Elka to use. It's a little smaller, and what I made this one out of is one of those bigger size paint stirring sticks that you can get at the hardware store. So I cut it. I mean, they're long, because they're for stirring the paint in the big, like 5-gallon buckets. But I cut it down, and then it has this little handle already on it. So I left that the way it was. And all I'm gonna do is just kind of carefully trim with my good sharp pocket knife. I'm gonna trim the edges of this off where I had left them a little proud. Okay. It's never perfect when I do something, but that's good enough for our uses. And now I'm just going to open up my polishing compound and rub that right into the leather. So polishing compounds are sold. This one is labeled as being pretty coarse. These things are measured in, I can't remember, microns or something. People geek out about this stuff. There's whole websites devoted to knife sharpening and whole sections on internet forums, and that's great. Power to those people. I don't spend a great deal of time worrying about how many microns are in my stropping compound. What I've observed is for no better of a carver than I am, and for the kind of stuff I do with my knives, almost everything I've ever used that was some kind of polishing compound did what I wanted it to do and got them pretty sharp. So that's ready to go. And now Elka is in the stropping business. So I hope that's helpful. Comment any questions that you may have, and we'll see you next time.